As of October 2019, there were 48 active aircraft carriers in the world, operated by the navies of 13 different countries. The United States Navy holds 24 of those aircraft carriers, with 11 being nuclear-powered. These nuclear carriers remain the largest in the world, with a total combined deck space over twice that of all the other nations with carriers combined. These ships, although important for American military prowess, have been noted to be cumbersome to operate as military watercraft, and are hugely expensive to build and maintain. For these reasons, the United States Air Force explored the seemingly far-fetched possibility of creating a new type of carrier during the 1970s. An airborne 747 aircraft carrier capable of delivering fighter jets from midair anywhere in the world. The Boeing 747 first took to the skies on February 9, 1969, and quickly became one of the most popular medium to long-haul aircraft worldwide. It would hold the passenger capacity record for 37 years, and became one of the most recognizable and beloved aircraft in the commercial aviation industry. The U.S. Air Force had other plans for the Boeing 747, well beyond its usual passenger and cargo utility. Several members of the USAF believed the aircraft could be reconfigured and transformed into an airborne aircraft carrier. They commissioned a feasibility study accordingly. The plan was relatively straightforward. Refurbish a Boeing 747 with an internal hangar, and then load it with small fighter jets specially designed to fit in the space. The idea for a Boeing 747 Airborne Aircraft Carrier, or AAC, was born. The idea and hope of having an aircraft carrier in the sky was hardly new. The US had been experimenting with aerial aircraft carrier concepts for decades prior to the 1970s. Interest in this type of vehicle started in the early 1920s, with 2 US Navy airship prototypes being launched in the early 30s, the USS Akron and the USS Macon. Both were designated as USS, or United States ships, which is usually reserved for water-based armed forces vehicles. The 2 airships could carry up to 5 small propeller planes each, which was stored inside an internal hangar bay. These onboard planes were often deployed for further scouting or defense purposes, and were viewed as a valuable addition to the country's military arsenal. Unfortunately, both airships were destroyed in weather-related accidents within 3 years of use. The experiment in airborne aircraft carriers was relaunched in the 1940s, this time in the hope that they could protect long-range intercontinental bombers. The idea behind Project Flight Conveyor, also known as the FICON project, was to have a long-range bomber, the B-36, carry escort fighters, namely the XF-85 and RF-84F, on board. These fighter planes could then be deployed and recovered when needed. However, retrieval of the aircraft in mid-flight proved particularly dangerous. Multiple docking methods were attempted with these long-range aircraft carriers, but only one method worked, using a trapeze-type mechanism. The FICON project was terminated after 4 years of testing that revealed inefficiencies and an overall dissatisfying performance. The concept of airborne aircraft carriers had waned significantly by the mid-1950s, as aerial refueling had proven far more practical and far safer in extending the range of fighter and reconnaissance planes. Aircraft carriers in the sky were considered too risky and unsafe. This changed by the 1970s, however, by which time new strategic vulnerabilities for conventional seaborne carriers had arisen. Also, far larger commercial planes like the Boeing 747 and Lockheed C-5 made the possibility of an airborne aircraft carrier far more attractive. The Air Force had several reasons for thinking that an aircraft carrier in the sky could be a viable complement for ocean-going carriers. Areas deeper inland can be problematic for ocean-going carriers, since they may require the use of larger numbers of support vehicles to access, such as refueling tankers, which aren't always easily available for that purpose. The Navy believed that the AAC could be used to solve that problem by allowing a larger aircraft to fly small aircraft above or near deployment zones. These small planes could then be released when needed to carry out needed missions. Even Lockheed proposed its own version of an aircraft carrier in the sky, albeit on a rather grand, if not downright daft scale. Lockheed suggested a huge nuclear-powered aircraft carrier with a crew of over 850 and an aerial endurance of 40-plus days. An ambitious but challenging proposal. By 1973, the Air Force opted instead for the more grounded AAC project using the Boeing 747. The Air Force's Flight Dynamics Laboratory, based out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, was tasked with determining the feasibility of the AAC project. For the proposed AAC, a Boeing 747-200 would be hollowed out and refitted with a two-level internal hangar. This hangar would hold what were dubbed microfighters, a small version of a short-range fighter aircraft that could be used in air-to-air and air-to-ground sorties. These small fighter jets would be dropped from the underside of the Boeing 747. The Boeing would also act as a refueling aircraft in which the microfighter jets could refuel when needed from a rotating boom located at the rear of the 747. Once a mission was completed, a microfighter would simply fly underneath the Boeing aircraft and be scooped up by a hydraulic lift system. The microjet could then be brought back into the hangar. This was clearly no ordinary aircraft. The Boeing 747 AAC required a crew for launching, recovering, refueling, and rearming the small jets, all while the carrier flew. It therefore needed sleeping quarters and a crew lounge to cater for a squadron of 14 fighter pilots and 18 mission specialists to ensure that they stayed rested and in relative comfort. The specialized Boeing 747-200 would also contain storage areas for extra fuel, spares, and parts. Additionally, it would carry a specially designed magazine for missiles and bombs for the microfighters on board. The Boeing 747 was considered an excellent choice, as it could be modified with relative ease. Space wouldn't be heavily compromised when fitting microfighters into its fuselage. It was believed the modified aircraft could carry up to 10 microfighters. The declassified feasibility report for the AAC reveals much about its testing and performance. Titled Investigation of a Microfighter Airborne Aircraft Carrier Concept, the 1973 report covers the work done in regards to the AAC from November 15, 1972 to September 17, 1973. The report states that it contains the findings of an exploratory inquiry into the size, performance, and feasibility of designing and utilizing microfighters carried by a C-5 class carrier aircraft. Such a type of plane refers to the Lockheed C-5, a plane similar in size and operating parameters to the Boeing 747. The report includes the evaluation of 5 conceptual designs of microfighters and 2 conceptual designs of carrier aircraft. The outlined main objectives of this investigation were to assess the feasibility and potential operational application of the Airborne Aircraft Carrier, or AAC, and microfighter concept, to develop a microfighter designed to be transported within a Boeing 747 or Lockheed C-5 aircraft, and to investigate the ability of said microfighters to be both launched from and recovered by the AAC. The report reveals plans for operational deployment of the AAC and its internally carried fleet from Europe, the Middle East, the Indian Ocean, and the top-secret U.S. Air Force Base on the Diego Garcia Archipelago, detailing how the Diego Garcia base could provide special protection of essential shipping lanes were it to have such a carrier. These lanes are the ones used for oil tankers traveling from the Middle East, understandably a priority for the United States. The AAC would also be used for air defense in the continental United States, or CONUS, as it's known in the military. The report also made a number of curious assumptions, such as stating that conventional Navy aircraft carriers would be obsolete by the year 2000. It also predicted that we would have nuclear-powered fighter jets by the year 2000. The report concludes with 2 main points. The first stated as, quote, "The concept of a microfighter airborne aircraft carrier is technically feasible and could be operational by 1980 with emerging technology. Operational feasibility requires technology demonstrations of air launch." And the second stated as, quote, "The system concept offers the potential of great national benefit in a political world that leans towards a low-profile American exposure overseas while being responsive to diverse needs of our allies." Furthermore, the report recommends research for development with regard to wind tunnel testing, dynamics for launch and recovery, design, and studies of preliminary designs. With such a forward-looking report suggesting that as of 1973 the AAC was both doable and a recommended investment for the U.S. Air Force, some may wonder what happened. Part of it is that the assumptions made turned out to be incorrect. Oceanic vessels have not become obsolete, and while nuclear-powered jets have indeed been proposed, concerns about the technology have prevented them from becoming a reality. The AAC project stalled. The Boeing 747 as a carrier was not the problem. The project's stumbling block came with the design and development of the microfighters. They simply weren't feasible. Even an alternative version of the AAC, this time an airborne warning and control aircraft fitted with a pair of reconnaissance micro-aircraft for surveillance missions, was rejected. The U.S. Air Force shelved the whole project altogether, not long after the report by the Flight Dynamics Laboratory asserted its feasibility. About 4 decades later, in November 2014, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, or DARPA, released an open call that raised a lot of interest. In its filing, DARPA requested feasibility studies into designs for an airborne aircraft carrier capable of deploying and recovering small drones while in flight. DARPA wouldn't confirm the purpose of the drones or whether they would be armed. DARPA's brief for the proposal stated that only existing aircraft can be used for the design of this multi-drone carrier, and that only minimal modifications are acceptable. DARPA seems highly inspired by the positive findings of the study regarding the feasibility of an airborne aircraft carrier, as reported by the U.S. Air Force back in 1973. Maybe airborne carriers will become a reality, as unmanned drones take the place of fighter jets.